Greetings. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor, brought to you by the Nyaradzo Group. I go beyond the headlines and beyond the sensational. Today, I'm in conversation with Judith Todd, Zimbabwean author. Enjoy this fascinating conversation. Judith Todd, welcome to In Conversation with Trevor.
Thank you, Trevor. It's good to be with you again.
I'm delighted, Judith, that we created the time to do this conversation. There's so much to talk about. Your life is an amazing life in so many respects, and there's so much for people to learn from. You said, Judith, that Zimbabwe has been my full-time commitment since 1965. And you said, I have been married to Zimbabwe since 1965. Unpack that for us.
I was lucky enough to be born at Dada Mission nearly 79 years ago, so it's not since 65 only, it's for much longer. And to be brought up in a vibrant community which included people like Ndaba Satole. So, for example, when the Rhodesian Front were coming to power and were looking at people as potential enemies, I actually had the privilege of knowing them as champions of what would one day be Zimbabwe. So what could be a better background?
And but when you say you've been married to Zimbabwe, for that long, how has this marriage turned out?
It's had its ups and downs. Of course, there was Rhodesia before Zimbabwe, and that was a bit tough. But it's been a life of consequences. For example, when I was at the university with other people who turned out to be illustrious Zimbabweans in the future, like Byron Hove and company, we had a demonstration in 1964 against the banning of, we had a daily news then. And that led to arrest and being found guilty under the Law and Order Maintenance Act, which was in force then. It led to the courts, and it actually led to me getting a scholarship to Columbia University. If you can work that out, there was a benefactor of what was then a vibrant magazine, the Central African Examiner, called Harold Hochschild. And in court, this is 1964, I was very optimistic about the future. And so I took the occasion to pledge myself under sentence of the Law and Order Maintenance Act, myself and my energies to Zimbabwe. And the magistrate, of course, was very angry. He said that was an almost revolutionary statement, and he did not mean the word revolutionary in a praiseworthy way. Anyway, this little magazine, the Central African Examiner, reprinted that speech of mine.
Do you remember what you said, Judith?
I said, under sentence of the Law and Order Maintenance Act, I take this opportunity to pledge myself, my life, my ambitions to Zimbabwe. And I meant every word.
And which was essentially throwing your full weight and whatever you were behind the liberation struggle.
Absolutely. 1964 that was. So anyway, Harold Hochschild saw that speech in the Central African Examiner. And he actually printed whole lots of copies of it and sent it to friends and contacts of his all around the world. As a result of which I was offered a scholarship to Columbia University. So I went off, very, very happy and privileged to be there. I went off at the beginning of 1965. But what happened in October 1965? My father was detained on our farm, And we didn't know this then, but I think it was a precursor to the Declaration of Independence by Ian Smith and Company. And I think that they thought that he might try to form a government in exile if they continued with that illegal act. So they just got him out of the way. But there I was at Columbia University, so he was scheduled to go and speak at a teach-in at Edinburgh University. And as he was arrested by the police just before he got to the airport in Salisbury, the word got out, and Edinburgh University contacted me and said, would I please take my father's place?
And of course your father was Sir Garfield Todd, the Prime Minister of the then Rhodesia, 1953 to 1958. And that basically, you ended up not graduating at Columbia, or you went back to graduate at some point?
Well, what happened was I went to take his place at this Edinburgh University, and by that time Rhodesia was very much in the spotlight. He was the first Commonwealth ex-Prime Minister to be detained, so that in itself guaranteed publicity. So there was a lot of publicity surrounding me as a consequence. And because of that, I was offered by McGibbon and Key Publishers a contract to do a book. And I said to him, no, I can't, I'm still a student at Columbia. But I went back to Columbia University, and then UDI was declared. And I was in such agony about our country. Everything was being closed on. It was even becoming an offence to listen to the BBC. So many friends were locked up. There was a state of emergency, as you know. So I went to the Dean of the faculty at Columbia University and I said, look, I don't think I can stay here. I think I have to go home. Because at that stage I thought that all Zimbabweans who could should go back to resist this illegal action. What do you think? I said to him. He said, there are so many graduates of Columbia who would give their eye teeth to be offered a contract to do a book. Go back and do your book. Go to Rhodesia. So I did. So my first book was called, guess what? Rhodesia. But my parents, I was at home with them. And of course they saw what I was writing, and they thought it wouldn't be a good idea for me to stay in Rhodesia when it was published, and even to get it out of Rhodesia was a difficulty. But fortunately an Anglican priest helped us and he got it out under his robes. Those robes are very useful.
Right. And you spoke about your marriage with Zimbabwe to Zimbabwe being a harsh one at times. You were arrested multiple times. House arrest. You were in prison with your father, Sir Garfield Todd, different prison places. You were restricted in your home with him. You couldn't go 800 meters away from home. Talk to us about that experience and how you survived through those arrests, that detention. Talk to us about that.
Detention, restriction, imprisonment without trial was becoming a norm in this country. And so many people that I knew, the leaders in fact, had been detained. While I was at university, a group of us were lucky enough to go to Gonakot-Zingwa. We visited in Cornwall, Jane and Gwenya, all of the others there, the Chinamanos, people at Wawa. So, and visited people in prisons like William Musarura, etc. So we knew about it. And being detained at home, of course, was a luxury. My first prison, Marandellas, was an experience because it was a male African prison. and I had to be kept in isolation, so I was put in their high security cell. And then I went on hunger strike, and then I had to be moved to a place where they had facilities for force feeding, which was Chikurubi. And that was education in itself, because Maradela's prison was quite crude. Chikurubi, the wing that I was put in, was for white female prisoners, and was quite luxurious. I had a bed, mattress, eventually a mosquito net.
In prison?
In prison, yes, indeed. And I was being, as it were, served by African wardressers who got to know, they were told not to talk to me. But bit by bit they got to know that I was now there because I was on hunger strike and something was going to happen about the hunger strike. And their attitudes were lovely. Some said, please won't you eat for me? One was of great help. She said, these whites are getting very worried. And so with her help I continued. But that was the worst time in prison. The force feeding was terrible, I can't tell you. It involved so many people.
You decided you are not going to eat, you're going to go on hunger strike.
Until I was taken to court and charged with a crime. We were locked up like most other people without charge.
And how long did your hunger strike last?
Quite short, actually. I think it was about 4 or 5 days. Refusing food is one thing, force feeding is another. Force feeding is one of the worst things that can happen to you.
Talk to us about that, the force feeding.
Well, the person in charge was someone called Dr. Baker Jones, and I knew his name from the press because Leopold Takawera had died in prison of undiagnosed diabetes. And Robert Mugabe, through his lawyers, pressed for an inquest and a court case. And at that court case, which was reported in the papers, it turned out that Baker Jones basically had been negligent. But his excuse was that he thought that Africans did not like to give substances from their bodies into the hands of an enemy, which shows what his relationship was like with these prisoners. So when I met him, and I knew that he was going to be in charge of the force feeding, I was scared. And then the other personnel there, especially the medical sister, were very hostile. They asked why I was there. I said, I'm on hunger strike. Do you think anyone knows you're here? Yes, I said, I know. Lardnerberg signed my detention order. She said, Lardnerberg is as much responsible for you being in this prison as the Minister of Health is for the rats in Harare Hospital. That was the kind of atmosphere.
And these are white compatriots?
Yes, they were. But eventually even Dr. Baker Jones, because this went on for a long time, one day when the sister was out of the room, he came and sat on my bed and he said, I wish there was something I could do to help you. So you see, people were conflicted all the time. So that was a rough patch of my marriage with Rhodesia. Then, of course, that ended up in exile for many years.
To talk to me about exile, the decision to go into exile. You were out in university and you decided to come back home, but you then now decide, I want to go into exile. Talk to me about what informed that decision. What was the thought process?
I didn't actually have an option. I was, after force feeding, etc., we were released from prison and we were at home, detained at home on the ranch. And my father remained detained there for 4.5 years. For me, I was already involved with the person who became my husband, Richard Acton. And I knew that he was very distressed by my arrest. So distressed, in fact, that he had had a breakdown in London.
Was he in the country? He was in London. He was a banker in London, wasn't he? Yeah.
He was a banker in London. He was brought up in this country. And then he went to university overseas, and he was overseas. But we had got involved, and he was very distressed about me being locked up. Then I heard he had had a breakdown. I didn't inform the authorities. I just said, there seems no point in me staying here, not earning a living, etc., etc. And so I was given permission to leave, but on condition that I didn't come back, and that if I did come back, I would go back to my last place of arrest, not my detention at home, but back to prison.
So you got a one-way ticket
I got a
to
one-way
London.
ticket, yeah.
Mm-hmm. How was that?
Mixed feelings. It was good to be with Richard again. I felt in a way that I was abandoning my parents, but the day that I left was the 13th of July, which was my father's birthday. And he said he couldn't have had a better birthday present.
See you go away.
To be back in freedom. And then, of course, I had all of those years ahead continuing to work for Zimbabwe as much as I could.
Talk to me about, you are in prison, you are in exile, you're writing a book, essentially because you've taken a stand against UDI, against the prevailing political thinking within the white community at that time. Break it down for us in terms of your position vis-a-vis the position of those that were supporting Ian Smith.
Well, of course, there would have been a lot of whites who were bright enough to see that the country was heading for disaster and who didn't like it. But people then, like even today in Zimbabwe, people were scared, you know. It's not an easy thing to be out of step with those who are in power. It's not an easy thing at all. Also, Ian Smith had sacked quite a lot of his top people, the top army guy, the top Air Force guy, because they would not go along with what was essentially treason. It was breaking with our constitution, with the Crown, etc. But it was sad too, because the whites were their own enemies. And basically they were, like again so many people today, who are harming the country. Those whites didn't realize they were harming the country. They were just protecting themselves and trying to live a normal life. But anyway, that didn't matter so much, because outside it was the height of the anti-apartheid movement. And it was the height of people deciding that the British government should not do a deal with Smith. It was the time of no independence before majority rule. And that's what I was invited all around the world, speaking, etc., about Zimbabwe, for the anti-apartheid movement, for the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Communist Party, everything. And I took every opportunity I could.
So you break with the defense of white privilege. That's what I want us to unpack. You have essentially the majority of whites deciding that they would do whatever was possible to retain this white privilege. You are the daughter of the former Prime Minister, Sir Judith Todd, and you decide to take a stance to undo this white privilege. That's what I want us to get to. What was the thinking there?
The thinking traced back to my birth at Dada, where we didn't know about white privilege. I mean, I was 10 years old when I went into white society at school. And so, you know, for us, for my father in particular, there were not groups, there was the country. And he could see where the country needed to go. And he knew that we needed to work together. As people were already speaking, I mean, like in Dada Lifestyle, Joshua and Cornwall, etc., everyone had this vision. It was just this poor, deluded group led by Ian Smith, who was so backward, so lost in history.
As Nyaradzo, we strive to continuously bring convenience to our clients. Nyaradzo Group is proud to introduce Sawi, a new virtual chatbot assistant on WhatsApp. With Sawi, you are now able to interact with us from the comfort of your home and can be assisted anytime via WhatsApp. With life assurance products, diaspora products, applying and assessing your policy, payment platforms, claims information, and any other queries concerning payments, policy information, or products and services. Simply WhatsApp Sawi on +263 712 992892 or register and start interacting and receiving notifications from Sawi on WhatsApp. Now, join in and experience a new level of convenience 24 hours a day with Sawi.
I'm looking at my notes because somebody described it as a suburb masquerading as a nation. There was Rhodesia then, which you and your father decided to take a position against that. Describe to me your relationship with your father, Sir Judith Todd, and then your relationship with your mother, who was instrumental in shaping the education policy of your father's government, and the residue of that remains up to date. Talk to me about your two lovely parents.
I was so very fortunate with my parents, whom I shared with others. You know, at Dada we had something called the Dada Mission family. And these were basically people from very poor backgrounds or people who were too young to go to prison. I mean, I remember there was quite a hefty girl there, and she had apparently said to an aunt of hers, "If you say that again to me, I'll kill you." And the aunt did say it, and so the girl did kill her. So you see, this was the Dada family.
Wow.
Then there were coloured children who were, I think that someone used the term harvested from what were then regarded as African areas. You know, they were the offspring maybe of visiting police or army, and many of them came to Dada too. So it was a very mixed bag, and my father and my mother were our parents, not my parents. What can I say? I think for the students at Dada, the generations of them, my mother and my father were their parents too, so I was sharing a community which was not a community of white privilege.
Enyas Chikwedere, the historian, wrote and said that this was the Dada factory that produced some of the amazing citizens. Describe in detail that Dada lifestyle, the thinking that embodied who your father was as
It was very, some people would say it was very primitive. It was aimed at the people who couldn't afford to go to school. And so facilities were very meager. I mean, they got better over time, but word got around and parents would come with especially their daughters, because from the beginning, Dada was open to girls. And there were people like Ndabani Satole. I mean, he would come, he wouldn't have any money. He ended up as my father's right-hand assistant, especially with cases to do with sickness or trying to treat people.
I didn't know that role of Reverend Ndabani Satole. That's interesting.
Yes. He wrote a book called African Nationalism. You'll find all about it there. And then, of course, in later generations, Dada produced people like practically the whole of the first cabinet in independent Zimbabwe, and people still running the country like Dr. Meshach Sibanda, as a graduate of Dada.
Wow.
Yeah, good society. It was fun.
And your mom?
She was the first qualified teacher at Dada. My father always said that he got his role there as a missionary based on her qualifications.
She was part of his CV.
He, in fact, was a very practical man. His father ran brickyards in New Zealand. And so my father was an expert in making bricks and tiles. You can see them still at Dada. He helped with the students to build a school. And so their philosophy was you started everywhere at the bottom and you built yourself up. And how he became Prime Minister of this country was a complete accident, but it had hope. For some years we had hope, I think. And then, of course, he was kicked out by the whites who were getting scared of his attitude, his desire to have a country of all the people, a government of all the people, not just some of the people.
And he said rather that when he was kicked out in 1958, after that cabinet revolt, that the noise of my falling as I was thrown out awakened African nationalism. So Zimbabwe is born in 1980. You and your father are celebrated as national heroes by the liberation movements. But that relationship doesn't last a very long time. Talk to me about that.
You see, there was a slight interlude before independence, and that is when Britain theoretically took control of this country. And Lord Soames came in as a sort of a governor. So one of the first things that Lord Soames did was to lift detention orders. And that was wonderful because that meant I could come back home. This was applied to people like Enos and Carla. There were about 8 or 10 people who were still subjected to detention orders. So that was a great relief coming back home for not just me, thousands of people, as you know. And especially for my mother, because she had been through very tough times with my father in the sense that she loved him so much and she hated seeing him so dishonored by his peers, by Ian Smith and company. Although even there, they tried. The first thing my father did when he got out of detention was to go and see Ian Smith. And I said, why on earth did you do that? And he said, because
he actually went to see him.
He did. He said things that by that stage were so bad in the country. He wanted to warn Ian Smith. And Smith agreed to see him, but my father said after a few minutes he realized there was no point in continuing talking to him. But back to independence, everyone was so happy. And then there were the elections, and Robert Mugabe won the election, and my father, as a former Prime Minister, went to congratulate the new Prime Minister, which was the tradition, and he said to the new Prime Minister that he hoped that over the years, from time to time, he might call on the new Prime Minister, because he said the last time he called on a Prime Minister, he was arrested, and he didn't want this to happen again. And so Mugabe laughed and leant across the table and touched my father's hand and said, Garfield, we want you for the Senate, he said. We want those who dishonored you to see you being honored. So that was a great start to the new Zimbabwe for us. And of course, we didn't realize that in future years, my father's citizenship would be removed by Robert Mugabe, and my citizenship removed. And that Mugabe had created a new clientele of suffering enemies. It was so sad.
So your citizenship was taken away from you. Your father's citizenship was taken away from you. Just like mine, my citizenship was taken away from me. I remember what it felt, flying to Johannesburg, knowing that I might not come back very soon because my passport would not be valid anymore. I was Tobai Wamudede declared me not a Zimbabwean and took away my citizenship. And those 3 months were the most traumatic 3 months for me, my wife, and my kids. And there's a lot of people who went through that.
Yes.
It was a lonely time. It was a painful time. How can my country do this to me? Talk to me about what that did to you. Was your experience similar to mine?
My father introduced me to the phrase, the enemy within. And this country has always had more enemies within, I think, than it ever has had enemies without. We had people like the so-called Minister of Law and Order and Justice, for example, Desmond Lydnaberg, snuffing out the lives of people who should have been in their prime, like William Uzororo, like the sort of intelligentsia of this country, all being locked up or stamped upon in some way or another. These were the real enemies of the country. And unfortunately, you know, we have them today. We have people who've usurped power and who are using it to quench the green shoots wherever they see them. I'm often reminded of Desmond Lydnaberg when I read the statements by Dr. Orbiton Porf. And you watch a man like that stamping on the green shoots of, for example, that farm, Eda Kameni, making life impossible for Sipho Malunga, Charles Moyo, Zephaniah Dlamini. Everywhere there is hope, there is pleasure, there's something good happening. Someone comes and destroys it. That's happened in Rhodesia, it's happening in Zimbabwe. So somehow we've got to tackle what my father termed as our enemies within. Those are the people who are quenching what Zimbabwe should be. The murderers, the looters, the people who are abusing power. And we mustn't be too scared to stand up in every venue against them.
Judith, powerful words, but unfortunately, the majority of our compatriots are either too scared or they've sold their soul to the enemies within. Is that your experience?
Of course people are scared. But there are other people who quietly go on in their own lives, making a difference, trying to do what they can. I mean, you know, it's very heartbreaking. Look at the city council here in Bulawayo. You go out to the park and you find people doing their very best to resuscitate, to rebuild, to plant lawns, and they haven't got the equipment, basic equipment. I went to the crematorium the other day to speak to Mr. Kazembe, who's in charge there. Again, there are people battling to do a good job without enough equipment. And the fault doesn't lie only with those who are abusing power. It lies with those who have, and let me try and use respectful terms, they haven't got the right priorities. They're thinking about themselves, their cars, their money, their holidays, and somehow they forget that man sitting on the street, unemployed and hungry. Mm. I know this is a universal thing. But in Zimbabwe, we've got the people, we've got the intelligence. If only other people wouldn't come along and stamp on those green shoots. Dr. Mpofu should be, Dr. Orbiton Porf should be encouraging agriculture, praising the people who are doing so well, instead of absolutely annihilating them. That's one example that we could be looking at and working on.
You know, in conversation with Trevor has made me, it lifts my spirits, because it has made me meet some of the most amazing people who are quietly doing amazing things, impactful things.
Yeah.
And I say to myself, and it's interesting when you watch the comments almost every show, people say, why are we in the state that we are in if we've got the kind of people that you're talking to? What's your answer to that? Why are we here if we've got the Judith Todds of this country, if we've got the Sipho Malungas of this country? Why are we here?
I think if we didn't have the Sipho Malungas, etc., that we would be in a much worse position. So we can be thankful that we are here, but we need to do much better. You know, the coup that got rid of Mugabe was a good thing, in my opinion. And there were so many people then who were inspired. I mean, I got a call from Hopewell Chinono, who I haven't met, and she's turned into a trenchant critic of the government. And we had mutual friends at the BBC, because we both used to work there in the past. I hadn't met him. He rang me up and he said, it's so exciting, are you prepared to help the new dispensation? I said, I'll do everything I can. So he said, well, I'm talking with people at the BBC, etc., and there's lots of help they're offering. And you might get a call from the Ministry of Information. I got a call from Mrs. Mutswanga, and she was asking my permission to put my name forward for the board of ZBC, and I said I would be honoured. Thank you for the invitation. But in fact, what happened was that I thought again, and you know, that was before Zoom, before COVID, before we knew that how we could communicate with people. And I thought, I'm really not up to travelling to Harare for board meetings anymore. But there was that desire everywhere, like you. You stepped forward to help. And something went wrong. I think there was not enough generosity of spirit. There were too many people saying, I want to be president. And there wasn't a desire to actually step forward at that time and be brave enough to offer amongst enough people. And of course there were these people lurking in the shadows who didn't want a change. They wanted to maintain their power and their positions, and it's so unfortunate, you know, when you see people like, let me be personal, like the Mnangagwas, obviously working as hard as they can to paint a beautiful face for Zimbabwe. And then you have the Dr. Orbit and Pops coming along and saying, no, look, this is our horrible face, this is what life is really like, and we must stop this.
So do you still believe that Mnangagwa means well?
Yes, I do.
You do. So you're 100% right. You, Hopewell Chinono, myself, and many others celebrated when Robert Mugabe went, because we saw
hope,
the back of a terrible dictator, and we saw in front of us hope.
Yes.
But that hope has been dimmed. It's been slowly killed, life taken out of it. The hope that Mnangagwa's coming in has suddenly turned into frustration. And from what you're saying, you think that it's people that are around him that are stopping him from getting where he wants to go?
I don't know about all of the people around him. There must be some, surely, who are not completely ensnared by fear and greed. I think there's also, you know, the problems of this country are so enormous now, are so heavy. And I think that we need a freshness of approach As I say, I don't think our enemies are outside. I think our enemies are inside. And all of our talk about lifting sanctions, etc., if we could deal with our enemies inside, all of the outside pressures would fade away. So I think that we should, as I think, if I may take this opportunity of congratulating you for your program and for voices like The Independent, these are things that should be strengthened and continue doing as they are, revealing what is wrong and putting forward what will be a better way forward. I think even people who must be getting very tired in government would welcome more support rather than watch their efforts being stamped upon by those who don't like green shoots.
I liked what you just said now, and we'll tie it to the green shoots. You've used the expression freshness that would work together to cause the enemies within and all that they represent to dissipate and give birth to a new country. What does that freshness look like to you?
I think that we see it everywhere, actually. These people coming out of universities with new schemes and I think that we see inventions happening all over the place, we do. And we see people trying to work with and for resuscitating agriculture, like Malunga, etc., business. As you say, the people are working quietly, diligently, improving not only their lives, but those around them. A freshness. I think a freshness demands us to get up and say to people like Dr. Orbit and Paul, listen, you've had your time, please go away, please leave us, let us get on with our agriculture and our lives.
Mm-hmm. How does that freshness look like in politics, in particular ZANU-PF politics, MDC politics, opposition politics? What does that freshness look like?
It's not there. I don't see it. I just see people aspiring for power.
That's disconcerting, isn't it?
It is, and I can't think of anything better as a system, but I'm afraid I'm getting disillusioned with democracy, especially two-party democracy. You've got people contesting, they build up their parties, they contest for power. They're at each other's throats all the time. Look at the United Kingdom House of Commons. Worse in Zimbabwe. People are intent on diminishing their opponents and grabbing power and getting it. This is not good. This is not good.
This is not good. Judith, what you've just described is disconcerting, but let me take you to an even worse place, which is Gukuraundi. Speak to me about your experience of Gukuraundi.
At that time I was director of the Zimbabwe Project, which was an organization set up to assist ex-combatants, full stop. It didn't matter whether they were former Zanla, Zebra, even a few Rhodesians came our way. So we were strictly non-party. And yet, at the same time, we could see people being dealt with differently, especially young Zebra. Things were getting very frightening. Ex-combatants lining up to get their allowances each month from the post office. Many of them were disappearing, young men. And there was a build-up of oppression and hate speech led by people like Enos Nkala and others. Again, trying to drag down, trying to inflame discord in the country, from which I think either they thought they could benefit or they were settling old scores. The saddest thing, obviously Enos Nkala for some reason, which we all know anyway, hated Joshua Nkomo and so wanted to discredit him at every point, and this inflamed tensions. And so things were very, very bad. And then, of course, the killing started. Now then, Bishop Carlin, head of the Catholic Church down here, was getting reports from the schools, the clinics, etc., of the atrocities being carried out by the state. And he couldn't believe that government could know about it. And he tried and tried to get appointments to see Mugabe and others, and he failed. So he got in touch with my father, and he thought that as a senator appointed by Mugabe, my father might be able to make an appointment with Mugabe for Bishop Carlin to come and present this evidence of atrocities being carried out. So my father said he would do what he could, and Carlin, it was agreed that Carlin would send to me documentation which I would hold for my father, who was then coming from the ranch to Harare. So this documentation was delivered to me at the Zimbabwe Project, and I rang my father and I said, I've got the packets, may I have a look? And he said, yes, I could. And I looked, and I was so horrified. I felt so sick, I wanted to go back home. It was killing, torture, mayhem, villages being burnt, people being starved. But that night I had an appointment at the Quill Club to meet a potential donor for the Zimbabwe Project. And of course, all the time our work needed money, so I couldn't cancel. So anyway, I had these documents in my bag. On the way home, I called at the Quill Club to see this man. We had our meeting. And then as we were leaving the Quill Club, which was a kind of drinking spot for journalists and others, as we were leaving, someone called, Judy, come and see us. It was a very old friend of mine, Justin Nyoka.
Oh, right.
We had been at university together here, and we'd been friends for years. And now, as part of the new dispensation, he was head of government information in the Ministry of Information. Judy, come and join us. So I went over to Justin, and I found him sitting next to Rex Nongo, the head of the army, and one other man.
Wow.
So what could I do? I sat down, I greeted them. Justin bought me a castle, and these documents were burning in my bag.
Getting heavier and heavier.
So I said, I'm so glad to be with you, gentlemen, and I'm so glad to meet you, General, because I'm hearing that there are terrible things happening in this country that you may not be aware of. And so, of course, they were shocked. And Nongo said, what? So I said, there are people being killed and put into mass graves, villages being burned. Now, Justin was pouring with sweat. And he kept saying, keep quiet, Judy, keep quiet. But this other person said, no, she may know things that we don't know about, let her speak. And so I continued speaking, and Nongo was getting very upset. I hadn't met him before, and I didn't realize that a stutter was a normal part. I thought he was either very angry or very upset. But I knew I could never, never, never have an opportunity like this again.
Wow.
And so I kept talking.
Was that courage or naivety on your part?
I can't say what it was. It was, I had no choice. I mean, look at the circumstances. How could I have those documents in my bag? Talk about a God-sent opportunity that you couldn't say no. So I continued talking, and Nongo said that he was going to Matabeleland by a helicopter the next day, and I could go with him and I could show him the mass graves. And I said, well, I couldn't because I don't know where they are, but I could probably find someone who could show him. I was thinking of Bishop Carlin. Anyway, I said, if you really want someone, get in touch with me. I gave him my telephone number and I went home. In the morning I rang Carlin and I told him about this encounter and I asked him for permission to give his documents to Nongo. And he was not happy, but he said yes. I mean, everyone was trying. He was trying, my father was trying, now I was trying to alert the authorities about what was going on. So then I go to the office.
Do you think the authorities were not aware of what is going on?
I think at that stage we couldn't quite believe that they knew. Of course we were wrong, but we were trying. But I knew there would be consequences. And so about an hour after I was in the office, I got a call from our reception, which was downstairs, to say that there was a soldier and a military man waiting to see me downstairs. So again, this was something that had to be faced. You couldn't run away from it. What I did was I wrote a letter to one of my colleagues, Sister Janice McLaughlin, and I left it with one of my colleagues, Morris Zimbabwean. It was sealed. Morris didn't see it. Janice didn't see it. And it just said, General Nongo has sent a car for me. And then they could draw their own conclusions if I didn't come back.
Yeah.
And then I go down to the street and there's this very, as I write in my book, this very smart-looking gentleman who had been part of the group last night. It was Agrippa Mutambara.
Retired General Agrippa Mutambara. He was not retired then.
No, at that stage he was head of the staff college. And so he opened the door of the car for me. I got in. We went on our way to where or what, I didn't know. My mind refused to think about it.
Yeah.
It was the same when I was taken from Jikarubi prison from Marandella's prison to Chikarubi. The authorities said, you're being moved, we don't know where you're going. And you lapse into a state of such panic. There's nothing you can do except keep breathing. So anyway, off we go, and Mutambara is very pleasant. And I could tell that he was very distressed too. He was telling me that he was in the process of divorcing his wife who had been unfaithful. We stopped at a bottle store. He bought some orange juice, some beer. Then we went into a house. I don't know where it was, maybe Chikarubi. And there he slept with me, and I didn't resist because I knew that there would be consequences from the time that I spoke to Nongo. Mutambara was just the tool that they used. Then eventually it was over. He took me back into town, dropped me. He gave me his card. That was now Friday. I went then to see a friend of mine who was a psychiatrist at the university, Dr. Noel Galen, and told him everything. He got medical attention for me and everything. And life continued.
You have said that Agrippa Mutambara, in your view, saved your life.
Yes.
By not killing you.
Yes. I do believe that.
He could have killed you.
He could have, I suppose he could have, but he certainly didn't like what he was doing.
Okay. So he raped you, but he says in public that he never did it.
I think he says that it was consensual.
Okay.
But anyway, I haven't quite finished with this. The fact that I also considered him as a victim explains why on the following Monday I got in touch with him again. This is all in the book.
The book, yes, Through the Darkness. I've read the book.
Yeah.
A book that I recommend to all our viewers.
Unfortunately,
you've shared it, all these details in your book about.
But it's out of print, unfortunately. Anyway, the thing is, we couldn't let the impetus slacken. What was happening is that people were still being butchered and killed, etc., in Matabeleland. That was and Midlands, by the way, also. That was the overriding thing that was happening then. Therefore, we could not allow ourselves to get impeded in what we were trying to do. So the following Monday, I rang Mutambara and I said, could we meet? And we met at the Ambassador Hotel, and I had 2 sets of documents, Collins documents, copied. One for Nongo, one for Mutambara. And I knew in the meanwhile that copies were going to everyone else concerned, like Sakara Mai, etc., etc. So I did what I could, and it stopped there on that Monday, but I was grateful to be alive.
You haven't thought of pressing charges against Tambara at all?
Certainly not. As I say, he was a victim.
Okay.
And people they still don't understand the terror of that time. When people read the book, people said, why didn't she go to the police? Now, the last people you would go to in those days would be the police, because they would probably have said, why are you still alive?
Wow. Judith, that's a very painful part of our life as a nation, the pain that you went through, the pain that a lot of people went through, but more than that, people lost families, people lost loved ones, people don't have birth certificate for their kids. Burial orders for their loved ones that were lost. 20,000 people lost in the Midlands and Matabeleland. Robert Mugabe called this a moment of madness. It was more than a moment of madness. But the point I want to ask you is, what should be done? As far as I'm concerned, there is no closure to this issue, to the Gugurahundi issue. Nobody has taken responsibility. Nobody has been held accountable. How do we draw the line in the sand and move on? Is it actually possible to do that?
Trevor, again, I think that individuals are doing what they can. There are even private exhumations and burials going on, which of course is not at all good enough. But I'm afraid that this is the responsibility of the churches, the communities, everyone, the government, the so-called opposition. I can't answer your question. There are so many people trying who are working on it. I know.
I hear you, and I hear the honesty in your response. Let me take you to. I did say that, after independence, 1980, you and your father were embraced as the heroes, and then the relationship collapsed. One thing that has engaged me as I was researching your life journey is I'm asking myself, is there space for white politics in Africa? I look at South Africa. The passing on of de Klerk with all that he did and didn't do, and the positions that South Africans are taking for and against de Klerk. The role that you and your father played in the liberation struggle, Sir Judith Todd and Judith Todd, holding hands with Joshua Nkomo, the Silundigas, and all the amazing people that fought for the liberation of this country. White compatriots holding hands with black compatriots, contributing to the liberation of this country. Post-independence Africa says to me, there's no space for white people in politics. What's your pushback to that?
I absolutely agree. I think there's no space for such a thing as white politics. But I do think that there might be space within political parties for people who happen to be white.
What does it take for a white person to be accepted in a circle of black politicians? What would it take?
To forget about being white, which is difficult in these days, because I think one of the distressing things about modern times is what they call identity politics. Everyone is either black or white, or race and gender are very boring. I mean, people talk about the girl child. What about the boy child? Why do we have to keep splitting people up? But maybe there's room for white politics as such because they exist in South Africa. You've actually got white groups, whether they like to call themselves white or not, I don't know. There's no space here in Zimbabwe.
And yet there's a significant segment of Zimbabweans who are white, who still have significant economic interests in the country. Should they not be playing a role?
They should certainly be playing a role, but not as whites, as Zimbabweans. We've got to get over this white
Are
thing.
we there? Are they there? Do you move in those circles? Are our white compatriots seeing themselves first as Zimbabweans rather than white? Or the politics of the day enhances identity politics?
I don't know. I can't speak on behalf of other whites. But I'm just saying that to be true Zimbabweans, I think you have to forget about being black or white or ZANU or MDC. You just have to pursue a good life, a brave life. You can go to church, belong to your political party, but above all, surely you must be serving your country. White politics as such, no, I don't think there's room in this country for that.
Has Judith Todd, is she hopeful about where this country is? Does she still thinks that she has a role in enhancing and accentuating the goodness in us?
I'm always hopeful, but of course Zimbabwe could be a very much better place than it is now. As I say, I am tired of the egoism of present generations, the selfies, the Me Toos, the Black Lives Matter. Somehow we've got to get above all of this. But I think that the pain inflicted by colonialism and recent history will take a long time to subside. Therefore, for example, if I was young, I wouldn't go into politics at all. I would concentrate on what I'm trying to do now. I've got a number of young dependents, and I'm just trying to help them to love Zimbabwe as much as I do.
Judith, what has you're turning 80, hey? You're 79 now?
Yes, I'm 79.
What is this rich, eventful life of yours? What is this rich, eventful of life of yours taught you about life? What is it that you say, gee, I went through this. I wish they knew that. I saw Rhodesia go through this. I wish they didn't go through that. What is it that your rich life has taught you about life?
It's taught me how fortunate I have been and how precious every moment is. I remember reading something by Henry Miller, the author. He said, I leapt out of bed this morning with a great bloody whoop of joy. So it has taught me that everything is very fragile, including probably the people that we don't like very much. Everyone has a fragility and they have to be looked after in a way. They have to be promoted. I remember Cornwall saying, don't say passy, 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 down with people. You must say up with people. And that's what we must try to do, even with our political opponents, even with, for example, me choosing Dr. Orbiton Porf as an example of one of our detractors for Zimbabwe. Maybe we should go to him and say, look, Dr. Porf, what's your problem? How can we help you? And please, will you stop hurting other people?
Do you have any regrets?
Yes, of course I do. There are certain things I've done, I'm sure, which I'm certainly not going to advertise on this show, which I would regret.
Any regrets that you can share that I listen to young people?
I think that I could have been perhaps less scared than I have been from time to time. Therefore, I think I could have done more in trying to protect other people. And yes, there's this thing about acting on the spur of the moment. My father once said to me, look, if you're passing a hungry man on the street, it's much better if you can buy him a loaf of bread than if you can give him $1, because it might even be difficult for him to go and spend that $1. I think it's important not to miss an opportunity. You know, in my life I've discovered that if you do something that you know you should do, then you can forget about it and move on. But if you don't take an opportunity, I'll give you one example. Some years ago there was a young man sitting on the pavement and he was crying, I'm so hungry, I don't know what to do. And I moved on, I didn't do anything. That young man and his cry is still haunting me today. Now then, if I had done something then, whatever, I would have forgotten about him. And I think that's important to remember, to take what opportunities, put in the words of the poet Wordsworth, those little unremembered acts of kindness and of love are important.
Oh, so well put. So well put. The viewers at home might get the impression that your life was, except for the time in Dada, it was nothing but struggle. But you had wonderful time. You served as a member of the Zim Papers board. You were instrumental in the creation of the Zimbabwe Media Council. Those were beautiful moments. Talk to me about those moments.
They were beautiful moments up to the time that people started disagreeing. So what happened on the Zimbabwe Zim Papers board was quite early on. It became apparent that things were not good, and I asked for the book of minutes. I discovered that the minutes were not numbered, so you could put resolutions in that hadn't been passed by the board. There was a lot of skullduggery going on. But when I exposed that, Dr. Sadza, the chairman, got rid of me on the instructions of someone called Robert Mugabe. Wow. So that was a dead end. The other, yes, they've been, in fact, I can't just choose one or two moments. My whole life, in retrospect, has been a blessing. I've been privileged beyond words. I'm so happy, and so happy to end up in Bulawayo.
And you were a founding shareholder of the Daily News.
I was, yeah.
Talk to us about that.
I really don't know what to say about that, except that I see that it still exists.
Is that a good thing?
The existence of any newspaper, in my opinion, is a very good thing.
You are an author. You've had, what was interesting for me was that your books would get banned in Rhodesia and South Africa.
Yes.
You've written good, amazing books, which I recommend that our viewers get hold of. And interestingly, you say Through the Darkness is out of print. And so you and I and the viewers out there will do something to make sure that this book gets a reprint, and our young people get to read that book. So our viewers who are all over the world, Judith, love books, and I thought, let's give this author in you an opportunity to recommend to our viewers out there the books that you've read that have left an indelible mark on you?
Yes, markings by Dag Hammarskjöld, the United Nations hero who died in a plane crash in the Congo. It's his spiritual journey, really. Then Eleanor Sisulu's biography of her parents-in-law. These Sisulus remind us of what lovely people they were and what the ANC that we admired at that time was. A wonderful organization at that time. And then the other one was Catch-22, which was such fun, and it was an inspiration to me. It led me to write my own play, which was circulated secretly in Rhodesia, called A Guide to the Thoughts of Ian Smith and His Friends.
Is that play available somewhere?
I've got the manuscript.
You've got the manuscript.
It was great fun. The police went and they searched the university, but I wasn't at the university. I was on the ranch when I wrote it. So they didn't get the author. But the book is still there. And according to the South African press, it was circulated secretly in Zimbabwe, in Rhodesia. It was printed and mailed from overseas. According to the South African press, it was the most sought-after publication in Rhodesia at that time.
Awesome. Judith, what an amazing story. What an amazing life. What an inspirational life. So privileged, as far as I'm concerned, for us to come to Bulawayo and have this conversation with you. You know, for me, you are the ideal citizen.
Thank you.
Courageous, principled, whose life is led and directed by value. Allow me to tend to our viewers who are all over the world, who follow us every week. Remember, we are a weekly show. We come out on YouTube 7 a.m. every Monday morning. To ensure that you don't miss out on any of these quality conversations, such as one I've had with Judith, please click onto this red button and subscribe. And if you do, you'll get an alert every time we have one of these quality conversations. We read your comments, your suggestions, and we are grateful for them. So until next time, cheers to you all.